Every single state in the US has had at least one serial killer, if not multiple. And today I'm going to tell you guys about arguably the most notorious serial killer in Tennessee. And this guy's considered to be one of the scariest and worst in Tennessee for a couple reasons. One of the reasons being that he committed quite a few crimes in such a short span of time and terrorized like a whole community. Everyone was terrified to leave their house, go to work, and there was cops everywhere on stakeouts. It was a very scary time to be in this area of Tennessee. I'm going to get right into it because you guys asked for Tennessee quite a bit. So today I'm going to tell you guys about Paul Dennis Reed. Because of his crimes, he was called the fast food killer. Paul was born in Texas on November 12th of 1957. As an adult, he lived in Tennessee, and truthfully, I don't know a lot about his history or his childhood, so I'm just going to get right into his first crime. We are starting on February 16th of 1997. And he was 40 years old at this point. Dennis entered into a restaurant. It was a Captain D's, which is kind of like a seafood kitchen. He entered right before they were opening, saying he was looking for a job as a way to get into the door. And so they let him in. I don't know if they were going to give him like an application or if they're going to talk to him and do like an interview. I'm not sure what the exact reason they let him in early, but it sounds like because he used finding a job as a ruse, they let him in to talk to him. And when he was let inside, he ended up attacking them and pulling. He ended up forcing them into the walk-in cooler in the restaurant, and he forced both people to lie on their stomachs, and he ended up shooting them execution style. The two victims were the store manager. He was a 25-year-old named Steve Hampton, and then one of the employees, Sarah Jackson, and she was only 16 years old. After he murdered both of them, he went to the cash register and took out a ton of money and then fled the scene. And at the time, there wasn't any security system, any cameras, anything like that. They had no idea who just committed these heinous crimes. Again, it's before opening. No one else was there, and people found them dead in the cooler and had no idea who had done this to them. 2 days later, he ended up using that cash as a down payment on a car, but at the time they had, again, no idea, so this didn't lead to him being caught. And obviously, anytime someone is killed, it's sad, but these two people who had their whole lives ahead of them, who had futures, who had families, they were killed essentially over a car. Just over a month later, on March 23rd, he entered into a McDonald's. This was less than 4 miles from Captain D's. It was 3.4 miles away. And he approached 4 employees that were leaving the store, and this was as it was closing, so it's late at night at this point. And he approaches the 4 people, and he ends up holding them up at gunpoint and forces them all back into the restaurant and is holding them all hostage. He ends up yelling at them. He's wanting the money. He has a plan to hold them up and kill them the same exact way he did at the Captain D's. And unfortunately, he ends up shooting and killing Andrea Brown, who was only 17, Ronald Santiago, who was 27, and then a man named Robert A. Sewell, and I couldn't find his age, but he was killed as well. And he shot and killed them all execution style as well. And then after killing them, he turned to the 4th employee. His name was Jose Antonio Ramirez Gonzalez, and he went to try to shoot him as well. But for whatever reason, his weapon failed. I think it ended up getting jammed. And when his weapon failed, he was surprised by this, and Jose took that as his opportunity. And he tried to fight Paul. Unfortunately, Paul was a pretty big guy. He was pretty strong. He also had a knife on him that Jose did not know about. And so Paul ended up subduing him, and he ended up stabbing Jose multiple times. Jose ended up pretending to be dead so that Paul would leave him alone. And after him 17 times, Paul ended up taking $3,000 from the cash register and fleeing. And Jose, again, had pretended to be dead, and once he heard that Paul had left the building, he heard the door close, and he waited to see if he was coming back, and once he established that Paul was probably not returning, he ended up crawling to the phone and calling 911. And fortunately, he was sent to the hospital, and even though he had like really severe injuries, he did survive and later ended up testifying against Paul. For whatever reason, even though this guy got a good look at Paul and survived, they didn't suspect Paul at this time. They still had no idea who had done these crimes. And so they kind of had like a vague description of the guy based off of Jose's testimony, but they didn't know it was Paul and still were nowhere close to catching him. And obviously now a pattern is emerging. Someone is attacking people in a fast food restaurant and killing them either right before they open or after they close while there are no customers inside, and they are killing the employees and then taking the money. And so everyone is terrified to leave their homes and go to work, especially if they worked in a fast food restaurant or really any restaurant. And so that's just terrifying. I mean, I would not have wanted to go to work if this was happening in my area. And again, these happened less than 4 miles apart, so it was very, very close together. Exactly 1 month later, he ended up striking again. This time it was at a Baskin Robbins. On April 23rd, he walked up to the door of the Baskin Robbins store, and this was in Clarksville, Tennessee, so still close by, but not quite as close as just 4 miles away. and he arrived after closing, and somehow he convinced the 2 employees inside to let him in after they had locked up. I'm not sure if he said like he needed to use the bathroom or needed water or what, but they let him inside. Once he was inside, he attacked them, and he ended up kidnapping them both and taking them to another location, which obviously is a deviation from his original MO. So he kidnapped 21-year-old Angela Holmes and 16-year-old Michelle Mace, or Macy, I'm not sure which way to pronounce her last name. Once people realize that these girls are missing, the community is in a panic. Again, it's a 16-year-old and a 21-year-old. Their parents and families are wondering where they could have gone. They should have been home from their shifts by now. And because 2 other places had had murders happen just a month or 2 before, people are obviously thinking this could be connected, but since it's a different MO, they weren't 100% sure. Unfortunately, their bodies were discovered the next day. He had brought them to Dunbar Cave State Park, and he murdered both of them by slashing their throats. So in just 67 days, so just barely over 2 months, he killed 7 people in the same small area. Obviously, everyone is terrified, like I was saying, and people are just waiting for him to strike again at the next restaurant, and everyone is just hoping it's not the restaurant that they work at. At this point, police, again, don't know who's doing this, so they pretty much have no idea or leads. They decide to start staking out almost every single fast food place in the area, and police are working around the clock. Everyone is on shift all the time. They are trying to catch this guy, but unfortunately, they're kind of hoping that he strikes again because that's the only way right now that they're going to catch him. In June, he ended up trying to kidnap another person. This guy's name was Mitch Roberts. He was a little bit older, and he actually was his old manager at a place called Shoney's where he used to work. But fortunately, he was stopped, and this is when he was arrested. Thank goodness he was stopped because he clearly was going on a spree and was like rapidly escalating and likely was going to take even more people and kill even more people because he was devolving. And so fortunately, he was caught at this point, and Mitch did survive. So now that he is arrested, the police are looking into all their crimes and trying to get enough evidence against him, and they do find a couple things. So at one point they find Steve Hampton, who was one of the first victims from Captain D's restaurant. They find his driver's license and video rental card somewhere along one of the parkways in East Nashville. And when they find these cards and they test them for fingerprints, they end up finding Paul's fingerprints on both cards. They also are able to check and see that Paul had purchased gas near the location of the Dunbar State Park the night that he had killed the 2 girls from Baskin-Robbins. And they had a ton of witnesses that were able to describe his car in the area during the time of this crime. After they arrested him, they searched his property and belongings and everything, and they also find some of his shoes that had blood on them that matched the victim. So they are able to say that he definitely committed these crimes. During this time, he also was a suspect in a mass murder called the Brown's Chicken Massacre that had occurred in Illinois. 2 robbers had entered into a Brown's Chicken and Pasta restaurant, and 7 people were shot and killed. And for 9 years, this case ended up remaining unsolved, and many people thought Paul had done it. At this point, Paul is now in prison, and as they are collecting evidence in this case, they are thinking that maybe Paul did this, and maybe they can add more charges to his sentences already. They end up discovering in 2002 that a different serial killer named Juan Luna and another man named James Degorski actually were the robbers and murderers of this crime. There was also a string of killings at a bowling alley in Houston, and 3 different people were killed, and Paul was suspected of this, but another man ended up being convicted for that crime too. Some people still believe that it was Paul that killed those 3 people, but most people obviously think the guy that was convicted for them is the killer. Like I was saying earlier, obviously the entire community was paralyzed in fear, and the media really took off with the story even before he was caught. Again, they dubbed him the fast food killer. People were terrified to go anywhere. They are watching the news constantly, trying to see if he is caught. Paul ended up being on TV and was being interviewed by people, and he denied everything. He said he never did any of it. There are other attacks and crimes that some people believe Paul may have been a part of, but we're not quite sure. One of these suspected crimes was another restaurant murder that happened in January of 1997, which would have been right before the murders at Captain D's. This happened at Shoney's, and if you remember, I said that he actually worked at a Shoney's before. A night manager named Charles Thowett Jr. was shot and killed, and to this day, that specific crime has never officially been solved, but obviously people think that that was one of Paul's first victims, if not his first victim, and this would mean that he killed at least 8 people instead of 7. Paul was convicted for 7 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to execution, but never was actually executed. They kept pushing back his date, or things kept happening. But on November 1st of 2013, at age 55, so 15 years after the first crime, he died from pneumonia and heart failure. Paul was obviously a really terrifying guy. So scary to think that you could just go to work and then never come home. That's it for Tennessee. Let me know what state you guys want me to do next. It feels to me like we are well over halfway through the series, but in reality, I've only done about 15 states so far, I think. I have to count for sure. There are so many more states I still have to cover. So let me know which ones you want to hear about first, but eventually I will be covering every single state. So if you're worried I'm not going to get to your state, I promise you I will. It's just going to take some time since there's so many states to go through.